The captured officer had spent enough time near the American colonel to notice the thing that did not fit, and when he finally asked about it, the question came out almost as an accusation, because it offended something in his understanding of how men are supposed to work. He was a Chinese officer, taken prisoner in the fighting around the Chosin Reservoir, and he had been near the command post long enough to watch the barrel-chested American who ran it. And the thing he had noticed, the thing that did not fit, was this. The colonel was not afraid. Not in the way the officer expected, not in the way that would have made sense given the situation. The man was surrounded, outnumbered, in impossible cold, in a position that by every measure should have terrified him, and he was not terrified. He was calm. He gave his orders steadily. He moved through the disaster as though it were weather. And the officer had watched enough men in enough desperate situations to know that this was not normal, and that it was not, on its face, believable. And so he asked the question that had been building in him. He asked the colonel why he was not afraid. He did not ask it admiringly. He asked it almost as a challenge, because he suspected, as an experienced soldier, that the calm was a performance, a mask, the thing commanders put on for their men, and he wanted to know how the American kept it up, or perhaps he wanted to catch him in it, to make him admit that underneath the steady surface, he was as frightened as any man in that valley had a right to be. And Colonel Louis Puller looked at him and understood the real question underneath the challenge and answered it with a single word that was not the answer the officer was fishing for and was truer and stranger than anything the officer had expected, and the officer never forgot it. If you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Let me back up, because to understand the answer, you have to understand what the officer had gotten wrong about fear and about the men who seem not to feel it, and it is a thing almost everyone gets wrong. In late November and early December of 1950, the 1st Marine Division was surrounded at the Chosin Reservoir, and Chesty Puller was one of its regimental commanders, and he was famous, among many other things, for exactly the quality the Chinese officer had noticed. In the worst situations, Puller was calm. It was one of the central facts of his legend. When things fell apart, when the news was catastrophic, when other men's voices climbed and their hands shook, Puller's did not. He had a steadiness under fire that the men around him found almost supernatural, and it was one of the things that made them able to follow him through places they could not otherwise have gone. And the Chinese officer, watching this, had made a very common assumption about it. He assumed that Puller's calm meant Puller did not feel fear, that the man was somehow built without the thing that made other men afraid, or that he had hardened himself past feeling it, and that this absence of fear was the source of the steadiness. In that view, the brave man is the man who does not feel fear, and the calm is simply what the absence of fear looks like from outside. That is what almost everyone believes about courage, and it is wrong, and the officer was about to be told so in one word. Now, here's the thing about fear and the men who function inside it, because it is the whole key to what Puller said. The men who feel no fear are not brave. They are, mostly, either lying or lacking imagination, or genuinely broken in some way that keeps them from registering danger, and none of those are courage, and none of them are reliable, and an army does not actually want them in command. A commander who feels no fear is a commander who does not accurately perceive danger, and a commander who does not accurately perceive danger makes reckless decisions and gets men killed. Fear is information. It is the mind correctly registering that a situation is dangerous. A man who feels no fear in a genuinely dangerous situation is not superior. He is malfunctioning, missing a signal he needs. So the brave man is not the man who feels no fear. The brave man is the man who feels fear fully, accurately, in proportion to the real danger, and functions anyway. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the capacity to act well while afraid. The two are completely different things, and confusing them is one of the most common and most damaging mistakes people make about their own inner lives, because it teaches them that their fear disqualifies them from courage, when in fact, their fear is the precondition for it. And there is a further thing the officer had missed, which is that the very steadiness he was admiring was actually powered by the fear, not opposed to it. A commander who is properly afraid is a commander whose mind is fully awake to the danger, sharpened by it, attending to every threat with the focus that fear produces. That alertness is useful. It is one of the reasons a frightened commander who keeps his head can outperform a fearless one, because he is seeing more, weighing more, missing less. The fear was not something Puller was succeeding despite. It was part of what made him good, feeding him a constant, accurate signal about how dangerous things were, which he then acted on with a clear head. The officer had imagined fear and competence as opposites, the fear something you had to eliminate to function. In the best commanders, they were partners, the fear providing the information and the discipline providing the response, and neither one alone would have been enough. Here's what doesn't make it into the accounts. The Chinese officer's challenge contained a trap, and Puller could have fallen into it in either of two ways, and both would have been a kind of lie. He could have played the legend, could have said something about not knowing fear, about being beyond it, and confirmed the officer's false theory of the fearless commander, and it would have been a lie, and Puller was not in the habit of that particular lie. Or he could have overcorrected into a different falseness, a performance of humility, and neither would have been the truth. The truth was simpler and harder, and it fit into one word. Stay with me, because the one word is the whole thing. The officer had asked why he was not afraid, and Puller's answer, in the shape it has come down, did not accept the premise of the question. He did not explain why he was not afraid. He corrected the officer's assumption entirely, because the assumption was the error. The word he gave, the single word, was in effect a denial that he was fearless at all. He said he was afraid. That was the answer. The officer had asked why the colonel was not afraid, working from the assumption that the calm meant the absence of fear, and the colonel told him the assumption was wrong. He was afraid. Of course he was afraid. Any man who accurately understood that situation was afraid, and Puller understood it better than almost anyone, which meant, if anything, he was more afraid, not less, because he saw the danger more completely. The calm was not the absence of the fear. The calm was what he did with the fear. The calm was a discipline laid over the fear, a choice about how to carry it, precisely because he knew that his men were reading him, and that if he let the fear govern his surface the way it wanted to, it would spread to them and multiply, and so he carried it inside, felt it fully, and did not let it out, and that carrying was not the same as not having it. And this is where it gets complicated, because to the officer, this was almost more disturbing than the fearless Superman theory would have been. Because the fearless commander, if he existed, would be a freak, an exception, someone the ordinary frightened soldier could not hope to be. But a commander who was afraid as anyone, and who simply functioned inside the fear by an act of will and discipline, that was worse in one way, because it removed the officer's excuse. If the American's calm came from some inborn absence of fear, then the officer's own fear was simply proof that he was ordinary, not built for that kind of steadiness. But if the American was afraid too, and steady anyway, then steadiness was not about not feeling fear, it was about what you did with it. And that was a thing available to anyone, which meant the officer's own fear was not an excuse for anything, and his own lack of steadiness was a choice he had been making, not a fate he had been handed. See, what most people miss about this story is that they think it is about a brave man admitting a vulnerability. It is about the correct definition of courage, and about how the wrong definition cripples people. Because most people, most of their lives, believe the officer's first theory, that brave people are the ones who do not feel fear, and that their own fear is therefore evidence that they are not brave, are not cut out for the hard thing, should leave the hard thing to the fearless people who are built for it. And that belief is a prison, because it is false, and it disqualifies exactly the people who could do the hard thing from attempting it. The truth Puller gave in one word is the key out of that prison, that the brave are afraid, that the fear is not the disqualification, but the raw material, that steadiness is not the absence of fear, but a discipline laid over it, and that this discipline is not an inborn gift reserved for freaks, but a practice available to any frightened person willing to feel the fear fully and act well anyway. And there is a reason this reaches into every life, because everyone is afraid of something they have to do. The hard conversation, the risk, the thing that scares them. And almost everyone at some point has looked at someone who seemed to do the scary thing easily and concluded, they must not be afraid the way I am. They must be built differently. I am too afraid to be like that. And it is almost always false. The person who seemed unafraid was afraid and did it anyway, and the doing it anyway is the whole of the thing, is available to the frightened person watching, is in fact only available to the frightened because you cannot be brave without the fear that is the precondition of it. Puller's one word gave the enemy officer, and gives anyone who hears it, permission to be afraid and to act anyway, which is the only kind of courage that has ever actually existed. The Chinese officer, the accounts say, was changed by the answer, more than by anything else in his captivity, because he had come with a challenge, trying to expose a performance, and had been handed instead a correction that dismantled a belief he had carried his whole life. He had thought the great soldiers were the ones without fear. He learned, from the greatest soldier he had ever been near, that this was exactly backwards, that the man was afraid, and that the fear and the steadiness lived in him at the same time, and that the steadiness was the more remarkable precisely because the fear was real. The 1st Marine Division fought its way out of the Chosin Reservoir, led in part by a colonel who was afraid the whole way, and functioned the whole way, and never let the men see the fear he was carrying, not because he did not have it, but because carrying it silently was his job, and part of what his men followed was a calm they thought was fearlessness, and that was in fact something much harder and much more human. He did not talk about the fear. That was the point. Talking about it would have defeated it. But the officer talked about the answer, the one word, for the rest of his life. The day he tried to catch an American colonel in the lie of his own calm, and the colonel told him in a single word that there was no lie, that he was afraid, and that being afraid and steady at once was not a contradiction, but the very definition of the thing the officer had spent his whole life misunderstanding. So, was that the truth, or a kind of humility that is its own performance? A great commander claiming fear he may not really have felt, to make a point. Some would say the calm men really are different, that some people genuinely feel less fear, and that this is a real and inborn advantage, and that a commander claiming to be as afraid as everyone else is being generous or modest, but not quite accurate, and that we should not pretend the naturally steady are just frightened people trying hard, because some of them really are built calmer. Others would say Puller was simply telling the truth, that the fearless are the malfunctioning or the lying, that every genuinely steady person under real danger is carrying fear they have disciplined rather than fear they lack, and that the most useful thing anyone ever told that officer, or tells any of us, is that courage is not the absence of fear, but the practice of acting well inside it, and that this puts courage within reach of everyone afraid enough to need it. Let us know where you land in the comments below, and if you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, make sure you subscribe.